Water. It makes up roughly 70% of the Earth's surface. The human body is also nearly 70% water. Water is quite possibly the most powerful force known to man, and arguably the most important element needed to sustain life. Health experts agree that we should drink a minimum of 8 glasses of water per day. Now, imagine for a moment that simply drinking water may, in fact, be killing us. Evidence is mounting regarding the dangers of drinking unfiltered tap and bottled water. While the statistics may appear grim, we can take action to ensure clean drinking water for everyone. There are many people involved in studying, regulating, and improving the quality of our drinking water, including government agencies, consumer advocate groups, universities, and journalists.
We are the primary enforcers of and stewards of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So we set national standards, and we provide financial assistance for states and communities, and we provide guidance. We also help enforce the Safe Drinking Water Act standards.
We work on drinking water contamination issues, including arsenic contamination, other chemicals that are toxic, bacteria and viruses and other contaminants in drinking water, as well as other toxics issues like pesticides.
I'm a professor at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, professor of physics and physical oceanography. I have a large research program in the coastal ocean off the southeastern coast of the United States, sponsored by NOAA.
The USGS is a science agency with no regulatory mission, and so what we do is we provide scientific data and information for other agencies and other scientists who use it to set things like policy, make decisions about earth science issues.
And my area of expertise started with nuclear and elementary particle physics, and the last 20-30 years I've been working on all sorts of environmental issues and anything that's dangerous to the environment and to people.
I'm presently working as a journalist in southeastern Pennsylvania. I've written a book called The Cancer Link, Is What You Drink.
Human beings use water in a multitude of ways. We cook with water, brush our teeth, shower, and swim in it. Water makes up the beverages that we drink. We make ice cubes out of water, and most importantly, we drink water in its natural form, often from a tap or faucet in the comfort of our homes. We don't often think about where exactly our water comes from or what chemicals it might contain.
One of the biggest threats is ignorance. People don't know what contaminants are in their water supplies. People assume that because we're not a third world country that our water is perfectly safe and there's nothing to worry about. And unfortunately, although our water certainly is safer than some other countries, there still are risks. We still have waterborne disease outbreaks in the United States every year from people drinking bad tap water. We still have a lot of arsenic in our drinking water. We still have chemicals called disinfection byproducts that don't sound good, and they're not. They can cause cancer, and several recent studies link them to birth defects and miscarriages.
There are other added dangers about our water that we may not be aware of. Things like pesticides and herbicides that are sprayed on crops. Once those crops are watered, the chemical water mixture becomes runoff, penetrating the soil and seeping into aquifers.
Lead, mercury, would certainly be at the top of the list. A lot of animal feeds have lead, mercury in them. And of course, if that's released accidentally, on purpose, whatever the case may be, from poor planning, it's in the water. And for example, a lot of that settles into the bottom, into the benthic layer of the river, into the benthic layer of the ocean. But of course, that's where the food chain starts. I mean, the small larvae, that's where they eat and grow. And of course, that's the prime place for the heavy metals to settle just under gravitational forces.
In our studies right now on contaminants that are associated with human and animal waste sources, and so we're looking at, for example, effluents coming out of wastewater treatment plants. We're looking at things like lagoons where hogs are kept, and confined animal feeding operations where animal wastes can enter the environment.
There are roughly 30 to 40 main types of contaminants that scientists and experts are concerned about in drinking water. Water contaminants can be broken down into two main types: bacteriological and elemental. Bacteria in water can lead to diseases like E. coli or be microbial in nature, causing disorders and possibly death. Elements in our water are a major concern as well. Most people are familiar with the dangers of mercury or lead. More recently, the threat of chlorine compounds in drinking water have scientists and experts concerned about their potential health risks for humans.
We have naturally occurring contaminants, and we have synthetic contaminants or man-made contaminants.
Other contaminants we're worried about include the byproducts of using chlorine. When chlorine is used to kill bugs, that's a great thing. I mean, it's been a huge public health benefit to reduce the germs in the water. But the unfortunate side effect of using chlorine is that it mixes up with other naturally occurring chemicals in the water, and it creates these byproducts. They're called chlorination byproducts or chlorine byproducts. And those byproducts have now been shown to cause cancer. They've been shown to be linked to certain birth defects and miscarriages. And we're concerned about that, especially when the levels get high.
Chlorine is an extremely valuable disinfectant. At the drinking water systems across the country, you usually have a process of filtration and disinfection, and chlorine is often one of the most commonly used disinfectants. But too much chlorine can be a problem. It can be a health risk, and that's why we've issued federal regulations to reduce the disinfection byproducts that may develop in the water after it's been treated and has the chlorine in it. If it meets up with some organic materials in the distribution systems, it can create a contaminant that presents a risk to cancer or other health problems. So it's important to measure for chlorine, and our requirements do have a monitoring for chlorine residuals in the distribution systems and to keep the levels at acceptable amounts.
Perhaps even more concerning is the possibility that your drinking water may contain the deadly element of arsenic, which, in its inorganic state, has been scientifically shown to cause cancer in humans.
We tend to mostly use surface waters, collected in reservoirs, make sure it's disinfected if appropriate, and that doesn't have arsenic in it particularly. Once one starts digging a well, there is a danger that you will pull out arsenic. So you then have to be very careful when you drill a well that you're not in an area where there be high arsenic levels.
There are about 40 million people in the United States who have their own source of water in their backyard, basically, these privately owned wells. And the thing about those wells is because they're not public sources, they are not monitored and they are not regulated like a public water supply. And so the quality of that well is largely the responsibility of the homeowner. And so most homeowners really don't know much about the quality of that water they're drinking from their own wells. So we've started to look at that kind of on a national scope, and lo and behold, again, if you're near sources of arsenic, for example, we're finding fairly high levels in arsenic of domestic wells.
Arsenic is a naturally occurring element. Arsenic is in soil. Arsenic is a byproduct of smelting.
Because 20 years ago, before we had chlorinated hydrocarbons as pesticides, we used arsenic. We took 20,000 tons of arsenic every year and sprayed it on our crops, and then forgot about it. And of course, we then got arsenic in our foodstuffs. And we still get arsenic in our foodstuffs because we spray phosphate on our crops, and that has arsenic in it.
Arsenic is a colorless, odorless, tasteless element that is classified as a carcinogen, meaning it promotes cancer.
There is concern, particularly in some communities, that they don't view it as big of a threat as other threats, and they have scarce resources. That's why we're committed to review the science over time, as the Safe Drinking Water Act requires us to do. But we're focused on helping communities comply with the 10 part per billion standard, and and use a range of tools and schedules, flexible schedules to meet that 10 part per billion standard.
I would not want to trust a government to keep me well, seeing that, from the year 2001 until the year 2006, absolutely nothing was done on remediating the arsenic content of water, and now we have communities throughout the western United States that are getting exceptions to continue to provide their citizens, their wage earners, their grandmothers, their grandfathers, their children with arsenic-tainted water. And it's a false economy, really. In my opinion, it's a false economy to continue to ingest this stuff over a long period of time.
Low levels continuously over a period of 5 or 10 years. It used to be thought that was safe, but if it's over a period of 5 or 10 years, the first symptoms are used to getting splotches on your hands, what's called pigmentation, either dyspigmentation of black splotches or white splotches, depending on who knows what. Then the next thing that happens, the skin starts breaking up into what's called keratoses, cracks down to the bone. Then, of course, you have to do something about that, or particularly if you're a farmer in Bangladesh, or you'll get disease in those and you'll get gangrene. If you have it for longer, if you wait a while, you'll start getting bladder cancer, lung cancer, kidney cancer, and then also this problem, mental deficiency of children has been expected also. All of these are being seen in these countries.
Bangladesh in the 1970s was undergoing one of the gravest water crises the world has known. Poor sewage treatment, flooding, and runoff led to bacteria contamination of the population's drinking water, making it unfit for human consumption and causing widespread parasitic infections and diarrhea. The government of Bangladesh, the United Nations Children's Fund, and other private aid groups responded by drilling tube wells for the population, which led to an even greater problem. It seems that without proper testing, many of the wells were drilled through arsenic-rich rock, which then tainted the water supply. In the case of the Bangladesh people, arsenic is responsible for nearly 250,000 cases of cancer since the early 1980s.
Arsenic is a very common element. It's about the 15th element in the world. So it's found in the Earth's crust all over the world. And in fact, it's probably found more in this state of Massachusetts than it is in Bangladesh, where they've got severe arsenic problems. But we don't just tap it in this state.
The problem with arsenic in water is nobody's fully aware. In countries like Bangladesh, People's Republic of China, Taiwan, India, the United States of America, Argentina, no one has really made a complete study of how far the problem exists, especially so in the United States.
In Chile, they were drinking fairly high levels of arsenic for about 30, 40 years. The risk of getting cancer was double that of a heavy cigarette smoker. And so that's really quite serious.
In the United States, the standards for drinking water that comes from a tap are set by the Environmental Protection Agency. The acceptable standard for arsenic in drinking water in the U.S., set forth by the EPA in 2006, is 10 parts per billion. Prior to 2006, it was 50 parts per billion. By way of comparison, the standard set forth by the World Health Organization is only 5 parts per billion. Scientific studies have shown that even at 10 parts per billion, your chance of getting cancer from arsenic in water are 1 in 500. At 50 parts per billion, those odds increase to 1 in 100.
Arsenic does present a risk, a cancer risk. It's a contaminant that we're very concerned about, and because of that, we strengthened the standard decades ago. And until 2001, there was a 50 part per billion standard, and we reduced that and strengthened the standard to 10 parts per billion. And it's because primarily the health concerns and the risks of bladder cancer or skin cancer or other types of cancer from long-term exposure to arsenic.
The acceptable standard for arsenic water is a very difficult thing to define. It depends who does the accepting. If, for example, it used the rules that the Environmental Protection Agency used 30 years ago for such like things as trichloroethylene, the standard would be about 2 parts per trillion, which is about 10,000 times less than what we have in the United States now. We can't possibly get that low, and so what we're now talking about at the World Health Organization level is 10 parts per billion, which is about 5,000 times higher. And what we used to have in the United States was 50 parts per billion. So we're probably coming down about a factor of 5 to the World Health Organization level.
A lower standard clearly is possible. Some other countries have adopted a lower standard, and actually EPA originally proposed a standard of 5 parts per billion, which is half of the one they now adopted. And EPA has determined that even 3 parts per billion is something that you can treat down to and you can detect reliably. So we and most public health groups have argued that the number should be 3 parts per billion or lower. 3 is probably the one that most people in the health community believe would be the most feasible one to adopt. Yes, there are technologies that you can buy today. You can walk into any engineering firm and get technologies that will bring you down well below 3 parts per billion. It costs money. Certainly, a big city, the costs per household are trivial. I mean, they're a few dollars per year. For a very small community that doesn't have the choice of hooking into some other water system, the cost can be pretty significant. And there are provisions in the law that can stretch out the time to comply if you're a small system and have a big problem. We would like to see every American have water that's safe to drink and that's affordable, and we think that can be done.
People in America are constantly looking for safe drinking water alternatives. The bottled water industry in America has become a $20 billion a year industry seemingly overnight. Unlike public drinking water, the bottled water industry goes tremendously unregulated by the Food and Drug Administration. Roughly 70% of all bottled water manufactured in the U.S. is not regulated. The FDA told us they were unavailable when asked to do an interview on camera about this subject.
Most people just assume that it's much better than tap water, that it's really pure, and because you're paying so much money for it, it's got to be better than your tap water. And we actually did a test a few years ago where we tested over 1,000 bottles of bottled water, 103 brands of bottled water, and we found that certainly most of the bottled water was pretty good. But we found that when we tested the bottled water repeatedly, the same brand, some of the batches were bad. And actually 1/3 of the brands, if you tested them repeatedly, had problems with the water quality, ranging from bacteria to arsenic to a variety of industrial chemicals and other contaminants in their water. So it was a surprise to us that the contamination was as widespread as it is. And the thing most people don't realize about bottled water is that there really is almost no regulatory infrastructure for it, meaning there aren't really a lot of traffic cops for bottled water. For drinking water, there are literally hundreds of people at EPA and at the state level that are regulating tap water. But for bottled water, I was stunned to hear that the Food and Drug Administration told us they had one person, the equivalent of one person, split up among multiple people regulating bottled water for the entire country. And we surveyed, when we heard that, we thought, well, the FDA told us it's really happening at the state level, so we surveyed all 50 states, and we found that there were only 2 states that had one person or more regulating bottled water. So really, bottled water is regulated based on a sort of voluntary compliance.
70% of all bottled water is unregulated. The 30% that is regulated is that water that is bottled in one state and sold in another. So you have bottled water manufacturers that are represented by hundreds of different facilities throughout the United States that are selling within the state that are